right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our first Ask the Expert session for 2025. We are very excited to be back for this year, and today we have, as usual, our senior solution architect Fredrik Jansson joining us, and with him we've brought a dear colleague, Sebastian Strollo, who is our head of engineering. And the topic for today is the top 10 frequently asked questions to the Avassa engineering team. And we have gathered questions, but we also encourage everyone joining to ask questions if you have any. So if you think of a questions throughout this conversation, or if you already have something you've been thinking about for a while around edge orchestration and management, feel free to post that question in the chat. Either you can ask the full forum, or you can send the question directly to me, and I'll make sure to ask that question to our experts. And with that, I am gonna hand over to our stars for today, Fredrik and Sebastian.
Thank you. Yeah, so we get questions from our existing customers and prospective customers, and we see that many of these questions are the same. So we thought that this would be a good moment to actually go through those questions and explain them a bit more in detail for the future. And to help me with that, I have Sebastian. Welcome.
Thanks, Fredrik, and thanks, Ami. Really great to be here, joining the expert, and happy here to be here as a guest, as a long-time Avassa engineer and now head of engineering. But Fredrik, I did not get the memo about the hat. What's up with the hat?
Yeah, sorry about that. So actually, in the hat, I have prepared the questions. So I'm gonna draw questions from the hat. That's the plan. That's the plan. So
that sounds great. Let's dive into it.
What do you say? Let's get started. So I'm gonna pick a question in here, and we'll see if it's you or me or both. Okay, so here is the first one, which says, there are multiple, in the system, there are multiple maintenance windows. Why is that?
True, it's a bit of a name clash there, I guess. We have maintenance windows going left and right, but I think there are two main ones that's good to know about. And the first one is about our system itself. We call the daemon that runs on the edge enforcer, we call it subd. And so that is updated when we do new releases regularly. And this is sent out to your control tower, and then from there distributed to your sites. When subd starts a new version, I mean, it doesn't touch your running applications. It doesn't really affect anything. Although if you're using subd to do any API access or anything that that services that subd itself provides, that will momentarily be lost. And so in some instances, for our customers, that's not acceptable during certain hours. So we added a maintenance window that can say, hey, don't upgrade subd during these hours, during my store open hours, or during my work hours at the floor, or anything like that. And so that can be defined then per site in a site profile, and distributed to your sites, and configured in each and every other possible way. But I think it requires you at least to have a window of an hour per week, I think is the minimum, so that you actually get a chance to get new versions from us.
Yeah, so that's for our software, but there is another maintenance window, right?
That's true. So so that comes for our, but I mean, as I said, that hardly interrupts any part of the system itself. So, but when it comes to your own applications, it can be a completely different matter. I mean, you may want to have a single place where you deploy everything, your own applications, but you have different sites, maybe even in different time zones, that have different requirements for not upgrading your application. And so there's a application maintenance window that takes care of that. So you can define it again per site or in a site profile and assign that profile to whichever sites this applies to. And then, of course, I mean, with everything in our systems, there are sort of multiple levels of things. So we have, with the multi-tenancy, you can define this, the site provider actually is the top tenant, can control this in one way, say, hey, these sites cannot be upgraded during these hours, but maybe the tenant actually writing the applications has a different idea of when is a good time, and so they can make that even more narrow than what the site provider allows.
But the key thing is it's got to be narrowed, right? So they can't pick an entirely different day or time. So maybe we'll just add that the maintenance windows are configured for certain days and certain time slots during the 24 hours in the day. There is also, which may be good to know in case of an emergency, you can actually bypass it. So you can kind of force your application in case you need to, get a quick fix out there and you basically don't have time to wait for the next maintenance window. You can bypass it. Don't do
Yep. No, that's good. There's a concept of a queue in there that you can so when you have a maintenance window, instead of deploying directly to the site, the application will be sent to the site, the image will be there, so it'll be ready to go, but it will be placed on this queue where it'll be waiting for the appropriate time. And so that's where that overriding comes in, and you can actually go into that queue and just say, hey, just start, I mean, do it now, or lots of little maintenance things with the queue itself.
So that's a good point. So once the maintenance window starts, if connection has been good all day, the site should have everything it needs to do the upgrade, right?
Yep. And that's the same thing for our software too, is sort of we distribute it so that the site is ready to go when the maintenance window kicks in.
Sweet. Cool. Okay.
Can I chip in with a follow-up question on that
Sure.
for our audience? So we received, I can read it out loud. How do you manage different applications requiring different hosting requirements, CPU, operating system, etc., and time varying needs?
Okay, so I guess there was a few questions in there. So if I start from the beginning, I guess with host requirements and CPUs. So if you have certain needs like hardware devices, like what was the question, CPUs or GPUs?
CPU, but I presume it's an example.
I took off in a tangent and now I got so, but if you have certain hardware needs, meaning that your application needs something to be available, and that is only available on certain hosts, we take that into consideration when we schedule the application locally at the site.
True. So that'll be controlled by labels then per host.
Correct.
And that'll influence where we deploy the host itself. So I mean, the Edge Enforcer itself has both AMD 64 and ARM 64 support, and so you can run a site that has actually different types of CPUs and even different OSs if you want. We'll be running on each host in your in that location, but your application maybe can only run on one of them, and so that'll be, as you said, I mean, taken care of by the placement decisions when we actually deploy the application itself.
I think there was something more to the question. Something about times.
The time varying needs, maybe that loops back to the maintenance windows you discussed before.
There's no, I'll quickly say there's no way of having certain applications upgrade at a certain time and certain other applications upgrade at another time. That you would have to solve by just adding another tenant that does this. And so, but having multiple tenants is really easy in our system. So that, I mean, that would be possible to take care of it that way.
Yep. Okie doke. I'm gonna go around here and see what we have. Okay, so this is a good one, I think. What is the difference between when we say a host and a site, and when should I have multiple hosts versus a single host?
That is a good question. So we chose the name site to mean just a place where you have compute, and maybe you have just one compute there, or maybe you have a couple that work in concert together. And the reason you have some compute at that site is because you want to run a particular application, or maybe a couple of different applications. So depending on what those applications require, you may need a host that has a certain type of hardware, or that is connected to something that your application is actually talking to. So you might have multiple hosts working together that have different applications, but they are spread out because of that they have different tasks. Or you may have the case that you actually have a rack of a bunch of computers that could equally be swapped out, and you chose a number of computers because you want resiliency. So you can easily do maintenance by just pulling one out, and your applications can move to the ones that are up, and so on. So it's really a matter of having that redundancy within a site by having multiple hosts.
I would also say the way I think about it is, if you have a number of hosts and you're going to run different applications at different hosts, and you know for certain that you will never be able to move a workload from host A to host B, just because it wouldn't work for whatever reason. It might be a hardware, or it might be serving some kind of industrial equipment. Then it might make sense to actually have those 2 or 3 hosts at separate sites in our lingo of a site.
Could be, but sometimes it could be that even though you're never going to use the different hosts for failover, having them in the same site means that you still have, if one of them goes down, you still have observability of the physical location itself.
True.
So there are, and you have some redundancy in that you have replication of images. So that there are some benefits as well to lumping it together in the site itself.
That's true. That's true.
And it's worth noting that we don't have any requirements of that all the computes in a certain site has to look exactly the same or anything. They can be very different, and as I mentioned in the last question, they can even be of different architecture.
Cool. So it's not a straight yes or no answer.
No.
Let's move on.
Varies a lot depending on use case. Cool. What's next in your hat?
Next in my hat is, this is a good one. I actually discussed this morning in detail with a prospective customer. How do I configure ingress, and when do I need ingress addresses?
All right, so let's we probably both talk about this at length, but let's perhaps first explain what it is.
Yep.
So in your application, I mean, in your application at an edge site, a lot of times what it does, it collects something and it just sends it away to somewhere else, or does some computation. But sometimes you need to connect to other things in that local network, or even more importantly, something else at that network want to connect to you. You're providing a service that you want to make available on that local network. And so now you need some way of talking to it, so you need an address. And so we have the concept of an ingress address for your application.
Correct. And it's a little bit more complicated, because in certain scenarios, you actually want a dedicated IP address for a service. The benefit with that is, of course, you will never have any port collisions or anything like that. You know that single service will run on that IP address. The flip side is, now you need more IP addresses, and that is not possible in all networks. So it's also possible to do port forwarding, which basically means that you expose the port to the host, and we make sure that the traffic goes from the host IP into this service. But now you have to be more careful with what ports you listen to.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of different methods there that makes it possible to allocate. But it can be a little bit confusing because it's something you have to configure on the site. And then in your application, you request an ingress address. And if you haven't configured it on your site, then you'll wonder why you can't start your application. So you need to set something up, either manually give it a couple of IP addresses that says you can use these, or say that, hey, my DHCP server will give you new address. Or as you said, use the same address as you have, just allow applications to grab a particular port.
Cool. Okay, I found a large one here. Let's see what this is.
Uh-oh, big question.
Oh my God, Sebastian, this is right up your turf. Why did you implement your own registry?
Well,
maybe can you say something about the registry that we have? Just what we have before we.
So we have a container registry that is actually replicated. It's a container registry that runs both on in the control tower itself, but it also runs on every site. If you've ever tried to do any application sort of if you try to run any application in Docker, or if you're trying to use Kubernetes, you notice that they kind of skim over this part a little bit. They say just put in the name of your image and we'll fetch it, and then we'll start it. But the fetching part is usually not a problem in the cloud, but at the edge that can be a tricky thing. So we realized we want to have a registry on each site, and it has to have very low overhead. It also has to conform to our multi-tenancy scheme so that we make sure that we don't share any part of any image between tenants, because tenants should be isolated. And when a site itself is isolated from everywhere else, you want to make sure that you can still restart your application or start it on another host where it isn't already in the Docker cache. So we said, okay, this fits in with our design decisions here. We definitely need some way of running a registry on a site. And the ones that were out there at the time when we started about 5 years ago, they just did not quite fit the bill when it came to resource consumption and as well as multi-tenancy.
Cool.
So what we do on a site is we replicate the image, and if you have a lot of hosts on we kind of sparsely replicate it to make sure that it's available on the site, but not perhaps on every host. We also make sure that the image that you actually put into the control tower, either through us fetching it or through you pushing it into the control tower, is then replicated. That exact image, not the tag name, but the actual hash of that image, is distributed together with the deployment to all the sites that need it. So we take care of that, sort of moving the image around to where it's supposed to be for you.
Cool.
And then, of course, and this is a little bit a part of the, I mean, we use the standard, the OCI protocol standard. So it's just, I mean, completely OCI conformant to the image registry spec. But that has some advantages so that we can restart an interrupted fetch. So if we know that a site had started to fetch an image that's supposed to go with the deployment, we can, and it was interrupted mid-flight, we can just resume from where we were and just fetch the part of the image that's missing. So there are some benefits of kind of implementing it yourself sometimes.
So we put some thought into it.
Yeah.
Very good. So let's see what we have here. Oh, what Linux distributions are supported, and what if my Linux distribution that I want to run on is not on your list? So should I start and you?
I think this is your area of expertise.
Yeah. So we have customers running on Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, Wind River, Elixir, home-built Yocto Linuxes. So the answer to the question is really, we don't favor any particular distro per se from a technical point of view. We can actually run on pretty much any distribution. It's not the distribution. We have a couple of requirements on kernel modules being available. Some are mandatory, especially around the things we need to do around networking and WireGuard and so forth. A couple of them are optional, used for example, setting up disk quotas. If you don't utilize that feature in Avassa, you don't need that feature in the kernel. So it rather comes down to what kernel do you have? And it doesn't need to be super modern. It's like 5.2 or later, I think you get the whole shebang. It's possible to run on 4. something kernels as well, but there are a couple of features missing there, as I think especially around file system quotas.
Yeah, and so and then when we say supported, usually what that means is we've added make sure that it works with our install script so that you actually just can have a really easy experience when you're actually installing it. But as you said, I mean, if you want to roll your own, that is actually possible, but there might be some manual steps involved.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, so it's a fairly open question. It is, how do you structure your applications?
Yeah.
Your applications.
Want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So in our system, an application consists of a number of services, which consists of a number of containers. Potentially, it could be a single container in a single application. But the application as a whole in our system is also versioned as a whole. So if you have a number of containers and you know that they will always be released, you test them together in your CI/CD, and you always want to run them together in the exact same version setup you have between them, then I would argue that having a single application makes a lot of sense. You don't lose anything technically. You can still run on multiple hosts and so forth. On the other hand, if you have, like, I don't know, a Redis database might be a good thing. Something that will serve multiple applications, or you think in the future that it will serve multiple other services, then it could make sense to break out that Redis and have it as an application on its own. And the other parts, the other applications, services can actually be life-cycled on their own, more independent from the Redis. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It's sort of you're packaging it together as a unit that will be version controlled in itself. So if you're definitely thinking about if the different parts need to be updated separately, then that's a good way of thinking about separation, as well as sort of just this thing that I want to deploy is actually providing a service for others. I think those are the main things to think about when deciding how to split your application up.
Yeah, but on end of the day, once everything is up and running, it doesn't have any like real technical impact. You can get things to communicate and do stuff, even if they are in separate applications. Okay, so let's move on. 5 more minutes. So here is one, and I will actually screen share for this one. So I got this, or we get this question from time to time when people look at the actual host. So it says, when I notice when I do Docker or Podman PS, a few NS control containers. What are those? So let me actually show you here what the question means.
This is one of those under the hood.
Yeah. So here in the terminal, I'm actually logged into a host that belongs to a site that I run in my setup. So if I do podman ps here, I see, for example, the Edge Enforcer. That is no surprise to no one, I guess, that we run the Edge Enforcer. And I see some of my applications that I run Mosquito, but then I have these NS control containers spread out here. Why do we have those?
It's good. So that this is really one of those under the hood questions. So the reason for that being there is that both Docker and Podman have this concept of, I mean, what they actually use in Linux is this feature called namespaces. And the namespaces in Linux is just a way of separating resources like networking, PIDs, the process identifiers, the user namespace, and so forth. And so it's a way of just Linux virtualizing these resources. I mean, the traditional Unix concepts, but having multiple instances of those. And a lot of what a container is actually, I mean, using this namespace feature and making it easy to use. But just the way that both Podman and Docker works is that when you start up a process in a container and then you start up a second one. So it's in our case, we run everything in the same service. You can have multiple containers, but you want them to run in the same, mostly in the same network namespace. And what happens is if you start one process, start another one, and the first one crashes, Docker will think, oh, this namespace is about to go down. I'm just going to bring down all the processes in that namespace. So we needed a way of kind of making sure that this space stayed up, because we wanted the feature that any container in a service can just crash and be restarted and not bring down the whole networking part of it. So we added this little. It's a tiny program. It's, I think, like 5 lines of C code that just basically waits for an interrupt signal to when it's actually time to bring down the whole application. And other than that, it just calls the system called pause, and which means just suspend the process until someone is actually killing it. So that's all it does.
Cool. Good explanation.
Way into the weeds.
It is.
I hope we didn't lose our audience.
It's something that you see, and it's not obvious if you don't know it. Once you do this and look at what's actually running on the host. So I think it's a great question. This one, let's find a new one. Oh, we're almost bottom of the hour. So here's actually a really good question. Why is the application version field optional? When should I use it, and what implications does it have?
Good one. Yeah. Maybe so I'll say what we thought about here is that there's usually, when you develop an applications, you are in 2 different modes. The first mode is you're just trying to figure out how things work. Maybe you're doing a lot of changes to your application, or you're trying to figure out what to write in your application spec. And so you're in this flow where you're manually editing stuff, constantly updating it and just pushing it. And then what you really want to do is just push out your changes, have the deployment being updated automatically, and just keep going, kind of thing. And the other mode is really kind of production mode. And that means you want to have a lot more structured approach to deploying. I mean, you'll make your changes and you'll want to define how to do an upgrade from the previous version, and you want to roll it out in a very particular way. I think that mode is very different, and that's when you start using the version field. And I think what we wanted to is sort of to make both those ways of working as easy as possible, and just very kind of convenient. But it is, yeah, maybe some confusing sometimes.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that once you add a version to an application, any type of change you make to the application specification, the system will require you to make a version change. So that is why it becomes, if you're hacking, building containers and just want to test stuff out, or hacking on the application spec, changing the version every time becomes tedious pretty quick. So that, yeah, that's why we support both those modes. Because the version is also super important when you, from an operations perspective, that is really what stands out when you look at what is deployed to all my sites and what version am I running here and why I'm not running that version over there. So the version is important.
I think the underlying design goal then is sort of to make it easy to do the right thing. So when you're running with versions, I mean, you want it to be easy to not make a mistake and just change something that just wrecks your current deployment. But when you're in that other mode, I mean, you want it to be easy to actually do the things that you want to do, the update.
Yeah. Time flies.
I'm sorry to break up all the fun.
Questions.
Yeah, we have more notes in the hat. I'm sure we'll continue at another time, and I'm also sure that both Fredrik and Sebastian would be happy to answer any further questions via email. I've dropped their contact details here on the slide, so feel free to reach out to them afterwards if you want to continue the conversation, have any follow-up questions, or any new ones. And I also wanted to mention that we'll be back in March, on March 26th, when we will have Red Hat joining us, which is very exciting. And the topic for that session is about bootable containers at the edge, the what's, the whys, and the hows. So we very much look forward to that. And with that, I want to thank you both for joining, both Sebastian and Fredrik, and thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, hope to see you in March.
Thanks for having me.